Hello, my creeplings. Tonight we're talking about another one that is a first time for me, but it's an oldie but a goodie apparently. It's called Waxwork. Like I said, this was the first time watching me. I had been aware of this movie for years, but for some reason I never found the time to watch it or its sequel, which we will also discuss tomorrow's video. So it's called Waxwork, and it is about basically a waxwork museum that has some extra mystical things going on with it. Starring, and again, I got the notes down here, so please excuse me if I look down. Starring Zach Galligan from Gremlins. Everybody remembers him. Deborah Foreman. She's best known for Valley Girl, but I've seen her in a few random other things that come up on my lists. A woman named Michelle Johnson is China. Dana Ashbrook from Twin Peaks is in it. And a bunch of other names that I don't know, other than the villain, played by David Warner. This man keeps showing up in a lot of things. He's the great, cultured, creepy man. He voiced, I know there is a big debate on how to pronounce this, but I will always pronounce it as Ra's al Ghul in Batman and Superman, the Justice League, DC animated universe. He did Ra's al Ghul, I believe. He was in Supergirl, if I remember correctly. The man's done a lot of stuff, and he 90% of the time plays a creepy dude or a learned man who, and he usually ends up being the villain. He's one of the greats. And then Patrick McNee from the old 60s TV show, The Avengers. He's the original John Steed. He's one of the allies in this. So we start out with a college student. I need to slow down. I'm sorry. Named Mark Loftmore, played by Zach Galligan. Basically, just you find out he's a rich goof off. He is good friends with his butler, though, which is a nice bonus for later. He's in college, and he's kind of on and off dating this China girl. But he's also friends with Sarah, a character named Sarah Brightman, who's played by the Deborah Foreman actress. And Dana Ashbrook plays one of his friends named Tony. I'm really bad at names. And there's two other friends. I don't recognize the actors. Their names are Gemma and James. Or Jonathan. One of the two. China's a brat. She's the rich, pretty girl who plays with people's affections, and she's currently playing with Mark's. She and Sarah are walking through their neighborhood, presumably on the way to class. This must be I don't want to say a small community college, because I don't know why a bunch of rich kids would be going there, but they live near campus. This is a residential area near campus. And they are invited to visit this Waxworks, which they're looking at the building, which is an old home, by a tall, creepy man, played by David Warner. David Warner's character is the proprietor. So they go and they go to this special midnight party. It's just them. It's China, Sarah, Mark, Tony, and Gemma and the other guy. Honestly, some of this was very forgetful and cheesy. The script was written in 3 days by the director, whose name is Anthony Hickox, excuse me. I'm not familiar with much of his work. I mean, it was a good ride. They go into the wax museum. They're met by this tiny little man. I mean, if anybody remembers the old Fantasy Island tattoo played by Hervé Villechaize, this little actor very much has tattoo vibes. He has a weird little accent. He's a tiny, tiny little person. Gives off the great creepy vibes. He meets them, lets them in. There's another tall butler who's got that kind of lurch feeling to him. He shows up and intermittently. And then David Warner's character, I think his name is Lincoln. We're going to check that. I'm going to check that real quick. Yes, David Lincoln is the character's name. They refer to him as Lincoln a lot when they figure out who he is. He invites them in to walk around the Waxwork. Now, the Waxwork is 18 dioramas of different horror scenes / characters. You've got the Phantom of the Opera, you've got a Romero-style zombie, you've got the Invisible Man, you've got Jack the Ripper, etc., etc., etc. Well, let me put my notes down. Dana Ashbrook's character, Tony, is the first to cross the boundary, and instead of just being standing in a diorama with wax figures, no, he's transported to a pocket dimension where he's attacked by a werewolf, played by, here's a good cameo, John Rhys Davies, Sala from the Indiana Jones series, Gimli from the Lord of the Rings series, and a million other great things. This is a very small role for him. I was surprised. I'm like, oh, that's JRD. We refer to him as JRD in our home. It's kind of sad that he did such a small role. I mean, it was an interesting piece. So what it all boils down to is when you're killed in the pocket dimension, it completes the diorama. You'll notice that in some of the dioramas, the victims are missing. Same thing happens with China. She crosses the boundary because she thinks the vampire is sexy. I don't know why you would do that. And she ends up becoming his victim. Now, these first two I'll call them pocket dimension scenes. They're cheesy. The werewolf effect, I thought it was bad. Like, the partial transformation Tony goes through was good. But when they got to the full body animatronic whatever, bodysuit, whatever it was that John Rhys Davies' character was supposed to turn into, that thing looked cheesy. It looked like Rubber Mask Man. I am not gonna lie, I was looking at that and laughing. It is billed as a horror fantasy, dark fantasy comedy, so maybe they were going for that. I have no idea. The acting wasn't bad. It's just I kept looking at that thing. I'm like, that is so bad. That is so terrible. But then you go into the vampire one. It is pretty much your Baroque, Gothic, vampire novel stereotype. I will say that the guy who plays the Baron, the head vampire, kind of reminds me of Eric from True Blood, the Skarsgård. I cannot remember which Skarsgård that is. There's too many of them. Alex, I think. But yeah, the Skarsgård from True Blood. That's who he kind of reminds me of, but I know it's not. There is a really cool effect with a guy with a leg that's had the meat taken off of it. That was pretty cool. Not my favorite vampire takedowns in film. All right, I'm kind of going off on it. So that happens. Sarah and Mark are still wandering around. The other two friends chickened out before they even got through the door. So Sarah and Mark are looking around. And Sarah's fascinated by the Marquis de Sade display. Now, what's funny about that is Sarah's our ingenue. Sarah's our virgin. Yet, a man who, was the man sadomasochism hand in hand, and she's fascinated by him. Little girl might have a little dirty streak. We just don't know. But she and Mark are like, okay, we're done. We're our friends. The little man tells them, oh no, they left already. Next morning, the friends still haven't shown up in their homes. They've been missing. So Mark goes to the police. And the detective that talks to him is like, there have been like 12 people missing in this town. That's an awful lot in the past 2 weeks. But Mark convinces him and his partner to go to the Waxwork, where they look around and they see nothing out of the ordinary at first. Lincoln BS's his way through the cops visiting. Well, They leave. Mark has like a light bulb moment. Bing! He drags Sarah to his home, where in his attic you find out that Mark's grandfather knew this guy. This guy was his assistant and possibly murdered his grandfather. And while that's going on, the cop shows back up to go investigate, because he's started to put it together that the victims in these dioramas look like some of the missing persons. So he sneaks in and he ends up thrown into the mummy display, and he's the victim that gets claimed for that. It's, again, kind of cheesy, but he does make a good Indiana Jones-esque looking character. I mean, they got a good actor who had that look. The effects were okay in that one. So back to Mark and Sarah. Mark and Sarah go to a family friend of Mark's named Sir Wilfrid, who's played by Patrick McNee. He's in a wheelchair, and he tells Mark that, oh yeah, your grandfather used to collect. They were really into horror and the supernatural and all that. And he collected, Mark's grandfather, collected 18 artifacts from I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry. They collected artifacts from the 18 most evil entities ever. And they also collected a bit of their home. So what Lincoln sold his soul to the devil, apparently, to live forever. Man's has not aged in 50 years, apparently. And he is trying to basically bring around the end of the world by using some form of or offshoot of voodoo magic to create wax effigies to house the spirits of the evil and the victims in the pocket dimensions, which are created by the part of the home or dwelling that the evil entity came from. He must have worked it into the diorama, makes a pocket dimension, they get their sacrifice, and once all 18 of these are finished, the evil entities can leave the waxwork and cause the end of the world. Blah, blah. So Sir Wilfrid tells them to go burn it. They try to burn it. But at the same time, the two friends that missed out before decided to come and take a look. They end up getting thrown in for sacrifice. Previous to that, just after they sneak in and try to burn the place down, Mark and Sarah get thrown into the Marquis de Sade. It was Sarah and the Romero-esque zombie dioramas. Mark figures out if he doesn't believe him, they can't hurt him. And he goes in and rescues Sarah. Now you find out Sarah actually is a bit of a bad girl. She actually really got into it. The character she was replacing, her mentality, her mindset washed over. She seemed to enjoy what was going on, even though she was, supposed to be near death. But Mark rescues her, but it doesn't matter because Gemma and her boyfriend, the other friend, get offered up anyway. All these characters leave their thing. And at the time that everything looks like it's lost, Patrick McNee's character, Sir Wilfrid, shows up with Mark's butler, of all things, and a crap ton of middle-aged men and old men willing to fight to keep them from leaving the museum. All chaos ensues. By the end of it, Mark and Sarah, I think, are the only ones alive. But they're the only ones shown escaping the burning waxwork, and they walk off into the night. What they don't realize is one of the zombie hands is following them, so it's loose in the world. And that's where it ends. I'm not going to say it was a bad movie, because I was highly entertained for about 85-90% of it. There were some points where I'm like, okay, this is a cheese fest. Am I going to watch this again? I probably will. If anybody's like, oh yeah, I've never seen this, I'm like, I'll sit and watch it with you. It's not a bad movie. I will say it was better than Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, so it would definitely get a better rating on that. No, walking in knowing it's a cheese fest helps. I didn't know it was going to be a cheese fest. I should have. When the description is horror, dark fantasy, comedy, expect Cheese Fest. But you can tell the script was only written in 3 days. They were worried about the Monster Squad being too similar to the Monster Squad. So take that for what you will. But it was an entertaining little ride. I am going to watch the sequel. There's a couple reasons I'm going to watch the sequel, namely Bruce Campbell and Michael DeBar. We will get into those when I talk about the sequel. I don't expect the sequel to be any less cheesy, especially with those two involved. So, the movie Waxwork, it was released in, I'm going to check my notes real quick. I'm really bad with dates, guys. 1988. So again, I was 8 years old when this came out. So Waxwork released in 1988, directed by Anthony Hickox, starring Zach Galligan from Gremlins. I mean, the acting was pretty good. The writing was mediocre. The effects were cheesy to pretty good. It depended on the effects. The score was nothing much to write home about, but it did enhance where it needed to. It was almost non-existent, though. And if you can find it for rental or streaming, or again, I found it on the Internet Archive. If I remember, I will link it below. Now, if you can get a hold of it for free or cheap, yeah. Would I spend money on a collector's edition? No. No. So on that note, my creeplings, I'm going to say goodnight. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.